the biggest thing that people don't get is the market dictates the value.
Opportunities are endless with it.
But that's the biggest thing, is that our role is to maximize the value and push what is market to the limits by creating a competitive dynamic.
The deal is between two people.
The deals that get done are with buyers and willing sellers that are willing to compromise.
Business owner is the lead firefighter in the whole organization, right?
You get what you give.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a growth company that helps professional services firms from around the world increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is John Rotchford, founder of SASI, a boutique M&A advisory firm serving private and public technology companies. With over 20 years of experience in the tech sector, John specializes in cloud infrastructure across software, SaaS, hardware, and service-led business models. Since founding SASI in 2005, John has led successful transactions with industry leaders, including Google, Dell, Intel, Citrix, Veritas, Hitachi, Seagate, and Qualcomm. John, pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I'm really looking forward to it, and especially with the pedigree that you come with. It's always exciting to have someone who's got such a rap sheet when it comes to transactions and successful transactions, might I add. I guess the best place to start with any kind of podcast, I find, is giving our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand who John Rotchford actually is. So could you share in a few words a bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no, happy to. Yeah, I think it would be sort of what I'd say a bi-coastal upbringing. I spent half of my early years in Los Angeles. And then when I was 12, moved to Boston. So I have sort of a West Coast vibe, and then went to high school and college back east around Boston. So those were sort of my younger, more formative years. And then got into strategy consulting early on in Cambridge, Massachusetts for a company called the JSA International. And that really got me my first little taste of mergers and acquisitions. We would do strategic advisory services around basically what companies to buy. So we were doing it specifically in aerospace and defense. And large companies, multinational companies would retain us to help them sort of search and identify and see what the fits would be with companies. Purely consulting, not actually doing the transaction, but really doing a lot of the upfront assessment work. And that got me intrigued at saying this is a lot of fun and something that maybe later on in my career I may want to dive into it. And sure enough, I think a little later on, I had a chance to go work at Broadview, now Jefferies Broadview, doing sell-side M&A advisory work. And they'd recruited me out of Compact Computer. And that really led me to then really just diving into it and realizing not only do I want to maybe do a little bit of this as a consultant or working for actual industry like I've done with Electronic Data Systems and Compact Computer and a couple of other companies, but then really jump into the pure services side of it and working for the investment bank Broadview, as I mentioned, and then Silicon Valley Bank. So it was really sort of a path of loving consulting, but then really just loving the art of the deal. And a lot of it was, we'll talk more about it, more just aligned with my superpowers and what I'm good at. So I think a lot of life is figuring out what you're good at and then leaning into it. And I found that while I could do consulting, I could do other career paths, putting together and working on M&A advisory services really just fits with what not only I like to do, but the feedback has come back that I'm also good at it.
I think that you touched on something that I absolutely preach to the choir about, and it's finding out what you're good at and leaning into that and not being bogged down with what you're not great at, right? And a lot of my early career, I was in jobs that I probably didn't really push my greatness or the good stuff of me. And I was really bogged down by the less important stuff. And when you find what you're good at, it's like, okay, this is what I'm good at. Let's figure it out and let's move forward with it. And I think that's a key thing, just leaning in. But in terms of then M&A advisory, for the viewers and listeners out there, tell us more about what you do at SASI. What exactly would it entail for someone to come in and work with you?
Yeah, so in M&A advisory in particular, there's two sides to every deal. In investment banking terms, we always like creating more and more terms in investment banking. So instead of just selling it, buyer or seller, we call it being a sell-side advisor. So then you're representing the seller, or you're the buy-side advisor, and you're representing the buyer. Predominantly 80-90% of our work is on the sell side. So we're representing venture-backed or bootstrap companies, typically private companies, because of our niche and focusing on tech and specifically representing private companies, and then selling them to large, well-known multinational public companies that are out there, whether that's a Microsoft or a Google or an Oracle or an Amazon or an Apple. All of the large tech companies are our universe of acquirers that we deal with, and we tend to represent companies that are, again, are venture-backed or bootstrapped. And as you articulated well, it could be SaaS, it could be services, it could be semiconductor systems. But again, technology is where we tend to play. We do deals outside of technology, and we can talk more about that later, but our bread and butter is really doing stuff in IT.
Makes a lot of sense, especially with the background that you have and the expertise that you hold. But what do you think is the most surprising thing people seem to misunderstand?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is that who dictates the value and the price. So what I mean by that is oftentimes people will be like, "Hey, I think my company is worth 50 million," right? And they think that because they put 25 million in and they want to get it, they want to get a 2x hit on their investment. So their rationale for 50 million is I put 20, I at least want 50 or this doesn't make sense, right? Then they'll look at me and say, well, you're the banker. You're going to magically decide what the valuation of it is, and you're going to somehow create $100 million deal, right? Because maybe I get 50 on my own, but I'm going to hire John Rotchford, and he's going to manufacture a deal that's worth 100 million. So I think the biggest, thing that people don't get is the market dictates the value, not only in M&A advisory, but in selling your home, right? Often people think their home is worth 2 million when the relative comps say it's 1.5, and they think it because they emotionally get tied into it and think their house is worth 2 million. But when you look at the relative comps, it's 1.5. It's the same thing at M&A advisor. So the market dictates the value. What you and I think it's worth is immaterial to getting feedback from the market and where the market dynamics are. And those can shift quarter to quarter, year to year, based on numerous factors that we can talk about. But that's the biggest thing, is that our role is to maximize the value and push what is market to the limits by creating a competitive dynamic so that we are getting market value for the company. And we're not somehow getting a deal that's outside of where we think it should be. Basically, the seller doesn't dictate the purchase price. I don't dictate the purchase price. Hopefully, we just don't have one buyer, but you get multiple buyers in there, and they're going to look at it and start to figure out what the market can support for this trade.
Sure. And what kind of, and you touched on it there, like there's specific factors that the market might look at to determine the value of a business. What kind of factors would they be typically looking at to determine the value of a business?
Yeah, so a lot depends on the type of company. So let's take first maybe a services company, right? That doesn't inherently have IP, although I have had professional services clients that have methods and practices that I would consider to be intellectual property. They have very good systems in place for how they walk a client through something, right? So they do have something there that is proprietary that they bring to clients, okay? But even in those situations, service companies are going to trade basically more on multiples of EBITDA. They're going to trade more on some of the dynamics of the type of contract they have, the length of contracts they have, what type of churn they have within their client base. While services companies aren't traditionally MRR or ARR recurring revenue, they are recurring from the prospect that a lot of them may have customers they've had for multi-years. So they look at the consistency of how many clients, your top 5 clients, change every year. Not normally, right? Normally a pro-serve company, their top 5 clients, they may change a little bit, but they kind of have them for a long time because one project ends and another project begins, right? Because these tend to be the larger contracts, right? So they look at that and the diversity and rotation of that, and they're usually going to trade on a multiple of EBITDA and also multiple of sales. And they're also going to look at the growth of those service companies, right? So those multiples are going to be different, let's say, for a service company than for, let's say, a software company, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the magic question as well. And I know that there's listeners out there, especially audiences filled with professional services business owners, and they're going to be thinking, oh, what kind of multiple can I get? Is it a 2x multiple? Sometimes you hear 2x, sometimes you hear 1.5x, sometimes it's barely that, like what does a typical, and I appreciate it's a broad question for a broad industry bracket, but what are you typically seeing?
I think you hit it. I think it's basically 1 to 2x. It's a legacy professional services business with limited to no growth. Let's say margins are tighter than normal. Maybe it's not at the upper end, then it could go down to 0.7, 0.6, 0.5x revenue. If it's something where it's just the margins aren't great and the free cash flow isn't great. So this is where it's just not the multiple of revenue. They're very different if you're a $10 million professional services with $4 million of free cash flow. Very different than 10 million and 500K of free cash flow, right?
Sure.
So this is where you can start looking at multiples of free cash flow, right? Because let's say you're at 10 million and you're at 1 million of free cash flow. Well, what's wrong with 8 to 10x free cash flow? And that's assuming no growth. Now you're at 0.8 to 1. Yeah, but you just told me you're growing 30% a year. Now it sounds like it's more like 1.5x revenue and more like a 13 to 15x the free cash flow. So those are the things to do. And you can model that out, right, in a DCF analysis, which is discounted cash flow. When you have a company that's growing like that, profitably growing like that, right, the net present value of future cash flows is going to dictate a higher value, right? And in banker speak, what we do is we also put a control premium on that, right? It's like when you're selling your company, you have a loss of control, right? Well, there's a premium that gets put on that. That's why when you see companies get bought, like even in public markets, they never sell at whatever the stock price is, right? It's always the equity value plus a control premium on top of that. So yeah, but you're right. You're right in the ballpark, 1 to 2x. And then you'll see some that'll go for 3x because let's say you had a 100-person consultancy now with 80 full stack AI developers. That's not going to go for 1 or 2x.
Yeah.
That's going to go for a multiple. So depending on your competencies and the markets you're playing in, and if it happened to be in the AI space and you had a bunch of really great, AI designers and people in that space, you're going to sell for something that's not even tied to your revenue.
Which, that makes a lot of sense. It's more about the potential of the industry and the expansion. Makes a lot of sense. I guess I want to touch on, so in the UK, and I know it's in the US as well, there's been some larger private equity firms that have come in and rolled up essentially really small accounting practices, rolled them up, and then ended up now making them much larger organizations with, I guess, the plan to exit on the back end of that as well. Talk to me more about what the logic is behind that and why professional services is becoming a really attractive kind of spot for VC and private equity at the moment. Or is I don't think it's necessarily pro-serve. I think it's anywhere where there's a fragmented market and an opportunity to consolidate and get larger and actually get a player that can start having some heft and breadth to it, right? So take any industry services where there's a high level of fragmentation, both locally, let's say in the UK or internationally. The PE guys look at that and go, there's natural inefficiency, right? If there's 20 companies offering the same service in San Diego, and that means there's 20 HRs, 20 repetitive people, and they're all going after that same customer. Why don't we just, put that together, have one, and then get rid of all the duplications within those 20 companies? So a lot of it, they assume a certain level of operational efficiency that they can get through combining of those companies. Number one. So it's just, hey, if you take 5 companies together and they all are running at X% of OpEx and admin overhead, and I consolidate them and put them on a common system, right? I'm going to be able to reduce the overlap on HR, on sales and marketing, on even accounting, right? All of the basic admin features, I'll be able to instantly drop more to the bottom line by doing that. So while they pay whatever multiple they're paying for the company, but by the inherent efficiencies of combining companies, you're going to be creating shareholder value or enterprise value for those companies. So that's the thesis anyway. It's hard to do in practice, right? It always sounds so easy when you so eloquently say that. It sounds like a logic play. It makes a lot of sense. But I imagine practicalities wise, there's obstacles and difficulties involved, right?
And the other thing that the private equity guys know is that the inherent risk in a $10 million company is very different than a $200 million company. And what I mean by that is the scale of a $200 million company is going to be able to withstand a lot more market turbulence, let's say, or things that come up than a $10 million company. So if you were to go out and acquire 10 professional services firms with revenue of 10 million or less, the median price to multiple is going to be significantly lower than buying $200 million companies.
Sure.
So scale matters, and the price to revenues goes up. You can track it. I'm sure we'd actually go on ChatGPT and look at it, right? The median multiples for $5 to $10 million companies is here. It's here. So even if there is no economic efficiencies in doing this roll-up, Saeed, if I take 10 companies doing 10 million each, right? Put them together, and I paid 1.2x revenue. Now I've got a $100 million company. I can go sell that now for 1.5. What did I just make? Right? I just made a delta there of what I paid, simply because there's other PE buyers that will never buy $10 million companies. They want to buy $100 million companies, and they're willing to pay 2x. So I bought them for 1.2. I'm going to sell it for 2 because the next tranche of private equity guys are willing to take a lower return than what some of the younger guys are willing to take. So it's their cost of capital and their expected rate of return changes as the companies get bigger.
Okay,
I'm kind of going fast here, but
no.
Literally, you can that's what happens.
And it's the based off of the risk profile of the PE firm, right? And what they're willing to do to get the ROI makes perfect sense.
They don't need a 40% ROI. They don't need a 30% ROI, right? So that means they're going to pay more, or they are going to pay more because they know it's going to be competitive then, right? The amount of companies that are looking for 100 million plus companies is huge. There's trillions of dollars in money on the sideline, right? But to go through the work of buying $10 million companies, it's a lot of work, right? And if you can do that effectively and build to $100 to $200 million revenue business, there's a whole new slew of buyers that'll be, thank you very much for building this. I'm willing to pay a bit of a premium because you've de-risked it and you've done all the work for me.
Makes perfect sense, actually, when you say it like that. So tell me then, for entrepreneurs, founders, business owners, CEOs, when should they start preparing for an exit? Especially when you're helping with the sell side of things. When should they be thinking, okay, I bring someone in, I should be exiting in the next few years?
Yeah, so we're assuming that they built the company with an exit in mind in this situation, right? Okay. So they built it with this exit in mind. So, I think really from the beginning, I think from the moment they say, I'm going to start the company, I think having a business plan with an exit with identified strategic buyers is something that is worthwhile doing, right? And most companies I see now getting funding for their startups, one of the basic set of questions that are asked is, what's your exit time horizon and who out there would even buy you? So, right? If you're not growing a lifestyle business or looking at something to just be a cash flow business for you, and you're starting in 5 to 7 years, you want to exit, having a view to thinking through who those strategics are or what you need to look like for private equity is incredibly valuable, because getting feedback from people like me is really important then, because someone might be like, well, I could see myself selling in 4 years to these acquirers. Well, test that out a little bit. Is that even true?
Yeah. So what are the biggest deal killers you see when it comes to selling business, whether that's in tech, whether that's in professional services or any other kind of sector? What are you currently seeing?
Yeah, I think it's literally usually comes down to people dynamics. Sometimes it can be things out of anyone's control, where maybe there's an IP infringement or something else that's out there that as an entrepreneur, you don't know. Like, you could have a company and all of a sudden there's a lawsuit for potential IP infringement that comes up, and those can kill deals, right? But I would say generally a lot of the things that people get in trouble on is the human dynamic of getting out of conflict and getting into resolution. So M&A, just like selling a home, there's a lot of things that come up that can derail a deal. The deals that get done are with willing buyers and willing sellers that are willing to compromise. So if one party is simply not willing to compromise and hear the other party's position and find middle ground, that's probably the number one thing that kills deals, is someone digging in their heels and not wanting to compromise. And if that happens, then post LOI, if people aren't willing to be reasonable and let their ego drive it versus a little bit of empathy and compassion for where the entrepreneur is coming from, and seek to understand before being understood, right? So I spent a lot of my times learning why are they asking for this? And usually there's pretty good reason why. So while it may seem unreasonable when you dig through their rationale, sometimes it's actually, then I understand it. Now, I'm like, okay, I get it. I may not agree with it. We may push back, but but if they have a rational argument, then I go back to my client and say, actually, I've never seen this, but it's actually a good point. They have a good story for that, and vice versa, right? We may push back, and they're like, "Why are you pushing back on that?" And if they're like, "If I have an actual good rationale for it," they'll often say, "Okay, we can work with that, and let's find a middle ground so we can get the deal done."
Sure. Amazing. And it's really interesting you mentioned that. I'm intrigued to know what are the types of things that can lead to that. Like what are the PE guys or the people buying asking for that can lead to pushback or vice versa? What types of things would you typically see?
Yeah, so a lot of it could be around exposure in the indemnity clause. So as you, a seller, let's say you're selling your company, you're representing and warranting to a lot of things, that you are you, that your cap table is you, that you are the company, you have the rights to sell it, right? One of the things that can go sideways is, and I'll give you a few examples of this, then you also have to rep, and let's say there's an intellectual property rep that you're not infringing upon anyone, right? And all of that. And let's say you're like a software company and you go, yes, I have not, to my knowledge, no one's ever come after me and I have no issues, no threatened litigation around my things, right? Well, the buyer will often say, we want that to be unlimited cap, which means that they can not only go after the purchase price that they're paying of $10 million, but they can personally go after you in your net worth. And I know of 5+ large companies that are public that try to get that, right? And that's a deal killer. I would recommend you not take that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right? Now, if it's tax, conversely, if we go back to them and say, yeah, the tax liability that you've incurred is you, but we're going to cap that at the purchase price. If I'm the buyer, I'm not going to agree to that. It's going to be unlimited cap, because what if you nefariously did something and you never paid your taxes? I'm paying $5 million for your company, but you have a $10 million tax liability. I should be able to go after you. It's unlimited. Tax is tax. If you did something on tax and you don't know about it, that's on you. So do you see how it goes both ways? They can be unreasonable on an IT rep to want you to be personally liable. Subsequently, if I'm on a buyer, I want you to be unlimited on tax, because my exposure could be well more than the purchase price. What if it's a small deal? I've done a small deal where, let's say it's under 10 million and the company's been around for 20 years. If they didn't pay IRS for and I'm buying your company, it could be, the tax bill could be massive.
Yeah. And then
so it goes,
right? There's no small.
So, and also, other examples would be, we're going to decimate your organization and roll it into another organization.
Yeah. And that leads into legacy, right? Like someone who's
that's
selling.
HR. Yeah, that's HR.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like HR. Like, hey, I have a good culture. I have 100 employees. You can integrate them over a 2-year period. But if they go, no, we're going to fire all of your managers, they're going to report into a whole new line. Then, all else being equal, my client may go for door B and pick another buyer, right? To go do that, right? Or they say, we've been underpaying, let's say, because startups often underpay executives, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say you should be making 150 a year, but you've been getting paid 70, right? Mm-hmm. Another deal killer could be, most buyers will up everyone to market. Let's say you and I had a company, we've been grinding it for 5 years, paying us $50K. Yeah. We know our market's $200K, right? When the buyer buys us, they're going to have us as employees, let's say. We're not leaving. They should make us true to what market is, not above. But what if someone with my same competency, my same amount of years would be paid in market? I should get that. Yeah. I've had buyers say, we're not going to do that. We're going to give de minimis raises to everyone and kind of take it or leave it.
Wow.
And it's like, that's not going to work, you know?
It's really interesting to hear that kind of the intricacies and the inner workings of the deal and how deals fall apart, because it gives you an understanding of the requirements of what different parties want and how you can kind of work amicably to be able to get a deal over the line or not get a deal over the line. What's one thing you wish every founder knew before talking to buyers?
Gosh, I don't know if there's one. I think the number one thing to know is to be to be authentic and truthful, because if we're disclosing early everything about the company, the good and the bad and the ugly, then come later, like we're talking about in the process of closing a deal, there's no surprises. I'm not saying we overshare, and I've had clients do that where it's like they don't need to know that your second brother's cousin worked for the company, but then got in a car accident and then divorced your sister. And, we don't need to tell every story. You know what I mean? We don't need to go there. And it's not relevant to the deal anyway, right? But it does put a, well, why did your brother marry that person and then divorce? And he was your head of sales, but now he's not. So let's avoid that. But beyond that, but about everything else, authentic, truthful, straight up. And I think don't overpromise anything. So when we do forecasting and they want to know how your business is going forward, I think it's pretty important to be as if you were reporting to your board of directors, presenting a plan that you can go execute on, right? Because ultimately we want to do good deals. We don't want to do a deal, right? So that's the important thing, right? It's just from an honesty and an integrity perspective, that would be my number one thing, because then ultimately trust builds deals to get closed. And if there's any distrust, those kill deals.
Sure.
So from the very beginning, it's about bonding and trust and building a trust foundation so that nothing can crack the foundation when we're getting the lawyers and everyone else involved to close the deals. Because that way the principal that's buying it and the principal that's selling it have a trust that really no one can break. So when the deal goes difficult, generally the principals can then get together and say, we're good, let's go.
I think you've raised a really interesting point there, because and you touched on it earlier when we talked about deals, things that kill deals. And it's it can be ego, it can be pride, it can be someone digging their heels. And a lot of it is fundamentally, the deal is between two people, right? And there's obviously businesses involved, lawyers involved and everything, but fundamentally it's two people making a deal. And if you can get into a position where you're in an authentic place, trustworthy place with each other, good relationship, it gives you far more of a likely outcome to be a successful deal than not a successful deal. And I think that rings true in all walks of life, not just in deal making. Fundamentally, if you're an authentic person, you have more of a chance of actually getting things across the line, right?
That's right. Really, in everything, and how you deal with your clients, how I deal with my clients, building that trust and authenticity is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in this segment of the podcast, John, we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. And that's a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners think and operate when running their business. So at this stage of the podcast, I always like to ask the same question, which is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of your business?
Yeah, it's highly dynamic in what investment banking brings to the tables. For today, I am knee deep in a merger agreement that's about 80 pages long with a list of schedules. And so today my life exists of dealing with lawyers and going through an 80-page document, right? Fast forward to tomorrow, and I've got 3 calls with another client where we're talking to them about the technology and the fit. So it's a little earlier in the M&A process, right? Fast forward to the next day, I've got marketing calls with a couple of potential new clients that I'm dealing with. And that's really the fun part of being a managing director and running my own, whether I'm here or whether I'm at another bank. It wouldn't be very different. Like every day, it vacillates between deal execution, where we are in it with outbound marketing or networking with other companies, to working with companies that are earlier in the process. So, and one of the things I like about it is that the diversity of my daily routines is quite dynamic. So that fits me. It fits what I like. I love that variety of, I wake up in the morning and the day may exist of 5 or 6 different tasks. Today, because we're looking to close a deal on a Thursday and today's a Tuesday, all the documents have to be done tonight, early tomorrow morning, to collect all the signatures to close on a Thursday. So right now I'm in that deal crunch mode to do it. But once that one closes, then we got 2 or 3 others in the hopper at different stages of it, right? So that's really one of the fun things of my job, is being able to not necessarily be able to predict what's going to happen, because it's really client related and deal process related.
No day is the same. I can imagine it. any business owner as well, that always seems to be the case, where it's like, especially when you're dealing with clients and being involved, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, especially if you're talking about handling internal issues, handling external issues, whatever it might be. I always say business owner is the lead firefighter in the whole organization, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so in terms of then, what are the most important metrics for you when running the organization and running your company?
Yeah, I really do think what I focus on, and this may sound counterintuitive, but really is adding value to our clients. I find that in deal-driven businesses where when we get paid big as a percentage of the trade, our cash flows are lumpy,
Sure.
right? Just the way we get retainers and we get paid a monthly amount, so we do have a little MRR coming in, but the big hits are the big hits, and trying to predict those, Saeed, it's next to impossible. We can't, right? So what we can do from a metric is saying, are we over-serving our clients? Are we doing everything to the best of our ability? And are we servicing them to a level that meets or exceeds our own expectations? And that's really the metric I go for. And I'll check in sometimes and go, a lot going on, but I'm looking at my client list right now. Am I doing everything every week to maximize our level of service to them? And if I'm doing that, Saeed, then everything else takes care of itself. The money, the cash flow, anything else really takes care of itself. The other thing would be making sure we're constantly doing, like what you're doing here with this, is some level of marketing outreach, quarterly reports, semi-annual reports on the market, staying in front of people. So making sure from that point of view that we're keeping it up and keeping a funnel of new opportunities coming in. Because I'm sure you've experienced this as an entrepreneur. You go out, you kill, you bring it in, you got some clients, and then you stop sourcing new deals, and then all of a sudden those end up, and now your book of business has shrunk. So I think one of the challenges we all face, in some of the people that you're working with, is how do you balance between executing on what you got and making sure you're keeping the funnel going.
Well, that's what you said is literally, like, honestly, it's that's what it feels like when running, especially our business as well. It's like as you just mentioned, it's the constant grind of constantly having to look for new, because I've been through it as well. When you bring in a book of business, right, and then you stop and you go, well, let's do a really great job for these guys, and then not focus on that, or maybe put the gas off. We got to focus on that. Resource needs to be allocated. Before you know it, once the projects are over and everything's done, then it goes, oh, well, where's the new deals? And then you're going to go, okay, we got to build that pipeline up again, and we got to do the work again, and so then that becomes a challenge in itself. You go, okay, that takes time. That takes months of building up the pipeline, but especially the types of relationships and partnerships that we create as well. It's not a one call close deal kind of thing. It's a relationship that you build over time. Right. And so, yeah, absolutely. Following on from that, how are you currently growing your business in terms of, you touched on outreach and outbound marketing. What other things are you doing to typically grow the organization?
Yeah, like any kind of high-level professional services, as you know, it's a relationship-based business, right? Where we rarely get over the transom. Marketing doesn't really seem to be effective from that perspective, right? So what I have found is to create a list of key influencers that I have. Call it a nifty 50 list of other bankers, VCs, entrepreneurs, high net worth individuals, lawyers that I know, and continually keeping them apprised of what we're doing, and also just checking in with them on a half-hour check-in call. So I find that that's invaluable, right? Because the last person they talk to is the first person they call. So it's keeping in front of those people is super important for me, because that's where the leads come from. My past clients that know a lot of people, sit on a lot of boards. So who are those key influencers? And let's make sure I'm doing dinners and lunches and events that bring them together. We just ran a pitch fest 2 weeks ago at a commercial bank called C3 Bank. We had 80 people there. We had about 40 high net worth individuals. These are all people that, like, why are you doing this, John? Well, it wasn't that I was expecting to get a new client there, but yet I'm creating an environment where I'm bringing in money, entrepreneurs, and whenever I do that, good things happen. Because then all of a sudden they're thinking of us as someone that's a connector, right? And someone that's in the flow of the market. And then a lot of them sit and have invested in a lot of other companies. And they'll say, hey, John, great to see you. would you do me a favor? Hit me next week. I got this company I'm invested in based in Oklahoma, and they're a SaaS company. Can you talk to them? Right. So in my business, mailers and stuff help, but I find it's that personal connection of picking up the phone and calling.
Yeah. It's simple, isn't it? In today's day and age, people like to pick up the phone and call a lot less than they used to. And you'd be surprised at the connection and the trust and the relationship you can build just by picking up the phone. And
yeah, my first, I'll tell real quick story. One of my first mentors, a guy named Chet Krensman, I was on the board of Boston University. I was on 3 public boards and a bunch of private boards. And he took me under his wing when I was like 23. And he literally said to me, he picked up his phone and held it in the air and goes, "The phone is your friend." And then he walked me through all the Rolodexes he had, the old Rolodexes that flip around. He goes, "John, you know what I do all day long? I'm on the phone with my friends. And that's all I've been doing for 50 years of my career is picking up the phone, calling my friends, taking care of my friends, serving my friends. And that has served me and helped me create abundance in my life." So if I think of those 50 people as my friends, how hard is it to call my friends and say, "What do you need? How can I support you?" Right? Whenever I meet Chet, the first question he has is, how's your wife? What's going on? You know what I mean? How can I help you? He was a of service person to a level that's really rare because he knew you get what you give. If I help these people in whatever they need, it's going to come back to me tenfold.
There's a level of reciprocity that comes in without a doubt. Whether it's immediate or whether it's long term, it will eventually come back. And when you do it with one person, it might take a while. But when you do it with 50 people, the compounding effect just comes through. Yeah.
How can I help you? And they'll be, can you introduce me to this person? You know, someone say, "I'm good, John, but I have a deal I need you to look at." But approaching it from a place of abundance and being of service versus me needing new clients.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And I think it's really interesting because my next question was actually to ask you what's probably the biggest lesson you could share with us today. That probably is a lesson in itself.
That is.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that our viewers and listeners can actually go away and take from, because professional services, as you mentioned, is very much a relationship business.
Yeah.
And building those relationships are fundamental to being successful in the space. John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'd like to end every single episode with the same question. And that is, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
I'm pretty blessed. I don't really think there's like one problem that I've really encountered in terms of it. Maybe I'll switch and say maybe there's an opportunity, and I think the opportunity revolves around automation and AI. I think the opportunity, or you could say problem, is, and I'm already incorporating it in deals and that we're working today, is leveraging what's out there in agentic AI, not only from outbound marketing, but I also think in scheduling all these things with the people I know. Like imagine an agent that knows I'm going to New York, where I know a lot of people, and I just tell it, "I'm going to New York, I'm available these hours," and it schedules it all out and does all the work on updating me on everyone I'm meeting with. So it's a personal assistant on steroids. That's one example. Yeah. Writing definitive agreements, contract, which I've been using it for, reviewing contracts, right? So how do I become more efficient and more effective as a banker leveraging AI? That's a huge opportunity.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And you see it now with what's happening with agentic AI becoming more and more prominent now. The opportunities are endless with it, because primarily what you're ending up doing is reducing the costs of the organization and making yourself more efficient in your day-to-day, which means that you can do more with your time, which means that there's more opportunity in your day. You're buying back your time with very cost-efficient tools, whereas once upon a time you would have had to hire a personal assistant, you would have had to hire whoever it might be. And so 100%, that's really interesting. John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. You've been a fantastic guest and some really great insights. So really appreciate it. For all those out there who might want to reach out to you to find you, where would they go? How would they find you?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. You can always hit me up on LinkedIn, and you have my name there. So they've got it. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to get me.
Amazing. Well, John, thank you very much again.
Beautiful. Thank you. Appreciate it.